Welcome to Alien Theorists Theorizing. We got a special interview episode again this week. I'm Braden.
I'm Zell.
I'm Dan.
And I'm Andrew.
And this time we've got Senior SETI Astronomer superstar Seth Shostak, author, astronomer extraordinaire, and we're super excited to have him here. This case file, I suppose. I'm gushing, like I'm freaking out because I'm super excited to have you.
Dan talks about
Seth.
you all the time.
Yeah, does he? Dan needs help.
Yeah,
that's been brought up.
He does.
He's got a green screen behind him to cover up all your pictures behind him.
Yeah, it's just all Shostak memorabilia back there.
Yeah.
I remember reading your book a couple of years ago, the Confessions of an Alien Hunter book, and just a great read all around. Just kind of getting, I think it's wonderful, like looking into radio astronomy and these things, and it's kind of just right up our alley, looking up these things, and we're just like, I'm super excited. I'm pumped.
Yeah. Now, Seth, for people who are not familiar with you, I mean, this has not been your lifelong job. Like, you've had many jobs in the past. So how did you get into SETI and searching for signs of other intelligent extraterrestrial life?
Well, you're right about my checkered past. I've had many different jobs in many different fields, actually. That's because I can't quite decide on what it is that I find interesting. But as far as SETI goes, I was interested in aliens. I mean, even as a grad student, I was using antennas that could be used to pick up alien broadcasts. So that, that was already, that already led to an interest. But as far as more recent events go, I guess I got interested in this when I moved to California. That was in 1988, after living in Europe for a while.
That's a good year.
And
that's a good year, 1988.
Was it? Are you referring to, Vino, or just being a good year because you were born that year?
Yeah, we were born that year. The two of us
got him.
Well, 88, yeah. Yeah, it was an okay year. Anyhow, I moved here. The SETI Institute found out that I was living in the area. SETI Institute, well, it wasn't even the SETI Institute. Well, I guess it was at that point, but they were only about 2 miles away from where I'm living. And they asked me if I wanted a job. So that's how that happened.
They didn't name it after you? I thought it was SETI. Isn't that what it is?
Yeah, it's almost my name. Not quite.
Oh, okay. All right.
If he finds something, they will change it to SETI.
Yes, they may even give me a raise if we find something.
Now, one of the things that you always hear is that, like, we're looking at space, and I've heard you talk about it in another show, so I thought maybe you could update our listeners, is that when we're looking at the sky, it's like scooping out the ocean with a tablespoon, is what we always say. And we've come a long way from that adage, right? Like, we're doing more now, and probably very quickly with AI going to be doing a lot more than just a tablespoon now, right? Like, we're doing a little better than that old analogy.
Well, we are, but improvement is measured typically by factors of 2. So it takes a lot of factors of 2 to go from a tablespoon to something like a bucket. And even then, you're not getting much of the ocean. So there's a long road to hoe when it comes to greatly increasing the speed of the search.
So in your words, what are we at? A quarter cup?
I actually haven't done the calculation recently. It's probably a kitty bucket, something like that.
Oh, that's good.
That's
all right.
Good. Can make a sandcastle out of that. We'll be all right. So what I'm kind of curious is, like, with your long career, and your years of exploring space through radio astronomy and the like, what's your kind of view on the prospect of finding alien life? Like, has it changed, like, throughout your career? Has it waxed and waned? Like, how is it developed, and where is it at right now?
Well, I'll tell you this. I mean, there's alien life, and that could be microbes on Mars. And then there's alien intelligent life, which is not microbes on Mars.
Right.
And if we're talking about microbes, there are plenty of efforts underway to explore places like Mars, but even some of the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, where you have liquids, in particular, mostly liquid water, where there might be some sort of bacteria there, and that's life. And if you find it, you could say, well, I'm not all that excited by bacteria. But on the other hand, if you were to find them, you would say, okay, at least life is not a miracle. Life is something that we can find elsewhere. And that would be, really interesting. I mean, I don't know that the public would get so excited about it, but the scientists certainly would, because it would show you that, okay, just making something that's alive is not so hard for nature to do. There's that. But as far as the looking for
our
aliens,
listeners of our show would think that's incredible news too. So would us, because that instantly means for us, it's like if it's in our solar system on another planet, extrapolate that, it's everywhere. And if it's everywhere, that means that the chances of us finding that intelligent life go up exponentially.
True. That's true. But it might not be found in our solar system, of course. I mean, if you were to find, oxygen in the atmosphere, some extra solar planet, that would tell you that there's some photosynthesis going on, on one of the worlds of that system. And that would be interesting too. So finding life would be interesting, but I think that nothing could compare to finding, for example, a signal that tells you that it's not just life, but it's intelligent life, because they're sending us, their personal philosophies.
Yeah, so that was a question I was going to ask, actually. Like when SETI's scanning the skies with all these radio telescopes, what was the Arecibo that mysteriously kind of collapsed? That was probably a big blow to the community. But what exactly are the signals you're actually looking for? Are we looking for like alien TV, radio, or is there a specific pattern? Or
well, you don't even care. By the way, it didn't mysteriously collapse. It collapsed, but it wasn't terribly mysterious. I mean, there was some mystery because
early on there was a little bit of mystery.
Well, the hardware that was used there should not have, given way.
Right.
But on the other hand, there's quite a bit of a history of radio telescopes collapsing. The 300-foot telescope in Greenbank, West Virginia collapsed, a number of years before Arecibo. And that's not supposed to have collapsed either. So these things are apparently more fragile than we think.
That happens.
Anyhow, but your question was different. The question was, all right, what was your question? What would be the effect?
No, like when you're using these devices to look for alien signals, what type of signal are you looking for? Just like in layman's terms.
Yeah, very simple. We look for what are called narrowband signals. In other words, the signal is at a particular spot on the radio dial. I mean, we don't know which spot, but it's not all over the dial, and that's the big difference. If you're tuning in a signal at 1455 megahertz or wherever it is, if you go to 1465 megahertz, you won't hear it. Right. Or 1445. So it's at one spot on the dial. And that's the kind of signal that nature doesn't make. Nature makes lots of radio waves, but they're all over the dial, right? I mean, you can tune almost anywhere and hear a quasar or a pulsar. It doesn't depend very strongly on the frequency that you're tuned to. But if you're tuning in your favorite TV show or radio show or something like that, it's at a particular frequency, a small range of frequencies around, 105.8 megahertz on your dial or whatever it is, right? And that's the difference between a transmitter and nature.
Right, like the sun, for say, probably gives off its a whole spectrum of radio frequency.
It does. It's the strongest radio source in the sky.
So along those lines, I kind of want to ask the question, like, in your opinion, like, what are probably, I would say, maybe the top three, or I'll give you that kind of whatever, like innovations in the field of radio astronomy or astronomy in general that you think have the best, or have the best chance of like finding, detecting intelligent life? Like, what do you think is going to help us the most in the coming years or decades?
Well, probably the biggest, spur to doing this kind of work was nothing technical at all. Well, it was based on technology, and that was discovering that planets are very plentiful. Right. Prior to 1995, we didn't know if there were other planets out there or not. I mean, we knew about the ones in our solar system, and we kind of assumed that there were other solar systems, but we didn't really know that. It was just a guess. And we also didn't know, what the prevalence of solar systems might be. Now, today we know that, 80% of all stars have planets at least, and maybe the real percentage is a lot closer to 100%, but 80% is already close to 100%. So that suggests that, there's just an awful lot of real estate where you might hope to find life, and some of that life might be intelligent life. And that, as I say, that's news. That's something of the past couple of dozen years. for me, that's relatively new. Maybe not for you guys, but that is, the big astronomy development. Now, as far as technology goes, well, that's just sort of a steady improvement ever since the first experiment to actually look for signals that were made by aliens, and that was Frank Drake's experiment in 1960. That's a long time ago, right? That's more than 6 decades. And of course, since then, the receivers that we have gotten better. To some extent, the sensitivity has gotten better. But one of the big differences is now we can look over a very wide range of frequencies all at once, something that really wasn't possible in 1960. So the experiment has gotten better simply because of technology.
Just a slow progression of human innovation.
Well, slow if you're a Klingon, yeah.
But yeah, that's probably my next. Speaking of Klingons, that was one of the questions I written down. So, thinking, not specifically Klingons, but I was thinking. So, if you are referring to Klingons, Star Trek fan, yes.
Well, I was a Star Trek fan. Yes, I mean, for the original series, because I was only middle aged when the original series came on the tube, and in fact. I was living in LA at the time. I was in grad school, and we got to occasionally interview some of the writers for Star Trek because they were just across town, that kind of thing. So it was kind of an interesting show. I still think it's an interesting show, and in fact, yeah. And one of my relatives was dating Leonard Nimoy's cousin, stuff like that. I mean, it had a personal aspect to it. Yeah, that's right. It turned out that Nimoy's ears were genuine. It was Spock's, not Spock's. It was Captain Kirk's ears that were fake. That's what we were told.
That makes sense.
That adds up. One question I had, we've kind of talked about it on the show before. What are your thoughts on, like, we've kind of talked about this theory about, we're receiving signals and maybe we're not receiving signals because other civilizations know that there's maybe like a apex predator civilization out there, the dark forest hypothesis. What are your thoughts on that? Like, do you think that there's any danger to us sending signals, receiving signals from other planets, that this could potentially be an issue?
Well, I mean, there is this question that you point out, the dark forest idea that nobody's going to broadcast because, doggone it, you don't know what's out there. And it might be aggressive. It might be dangerous. It's, you don't want to shout in the jungle, which is the dark forest metaphor there. But on the other hand, space is big, really big. As they say on the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Universe, it's really big. And that means that, it's hard to imagine that there is a heck of a lot of danger, even if you're, shouting out into the cosmos all the time, and anybody with the right equipment can pick up your signal and know that on this small planet, right around this nondescript star we call the sun, that there's something that thinks of itself as intelligent. And but I don't know that they would spend the money to come here and do what? I mean, in the movies they tend to flatten Los Angeles. Yeah. I'm in Northern California, and I have no problem with flattening Los Angeles as a project. That sounds okay. It will provide a lot of room for new condos and stuff. But I mean, it doesn't strike me as something that any thinking society would do, which is to say, to go light years away and destroy some other civilization, which is obviously no threat to them. Doesn't seem to me like that's really a cost-effective thing to do.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, my second question with that is, if, say, tomorrow you pop in your office and there it is, you're getting signals from an alien race. What's the protocol for you to report this stuff? Is the public going to find out right away, or is this going to get red taped, slap some classified, and you get promoted to some top secret agency? We don't hear from you again.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I hope will happen. It'll all be kept under wraps for the next 500 years. No, come on. There is a protocol, actually. In fact, I was involved with the rewriting of that protocol, but you can forget the protocol. We know what's really going to happen, and it isn't the protocol. If we pick up a signal, the first thing you want to do, of course, you would check it again, see if you can pick it up every time you look. But the next thing you do is you'd call up somebody at another radio observatory, somebody else with a radio telescope, and say, hey, look, point your instrument in this direction and over this range of frequencies, see if you can find a signal. Because, you may just be under the illusion that you found a signal, and all you've done is found something wrong in your software. So you would want confirmation by people who are not involved with your project. And that means that immediately now several groups around the world know about this signal. There's no way you could keep it quiet. And there's no effort made to keep it quiet. Actually, nowhere in these protocols does it say, now the first thing to do is shut up and not tell anybody. That's not the way it works. The first thing you do is you tell anybody you want. And
Perfect.
So you couldn't keep it quiet. Now, mind you, I don't know what the danger in that is. I mean, just listening is not dangerous. You could argue that, well, maybe as soon as anybody found that we were, picking up a signal from the aliens, that they would get on the air with their backyard satellite dish and tell them, look, we'd like to invite you guys to planet Earth. But the deal is you've got to take out those guys over there first so that we'll be friendly to you or something like that. I mean, it's trying to take some sort of advantage of this. But I don't think that's very realistic.
Hold up. Incoming signal. We'll be right back.
It's along that vein, like in your line of work, like I'm wondering, like what's the general, like I guess, like the spirit of cooperation amongst internationally, like what is the community like among like the radio astronomy? Like, yeah, if you were going to do this, like would you call scientists and you say like Italy first, or would it be like China first, or is there a preference or something? Like I'm just generally curious.
Well, there undoubtedly is a preference, but the preference is not on the basis of whether you like Italian food or, a Chinese food or whatever. I mean, it's on the basis of, do they have an instrument that could verify what you just picked up? And one, is it big enough? In other words, is it sensitive enough to pick up the signal? Secondly, do they have the kind of receivers that can get to that particular part of the radio dial? And third, are they in the right range of latitudes of the Earth that they could actually even see wherever the signal's coming from? So those are all just practical considerations, and those would be the ones that you would first worry about. I mean, the idea that, well, maybe you won't do that because you'll think that there may be some security aspect to this whole discovery. I don't think that the people that do this, the scientists that do these kinds of experiments, are really thinking along those lines very much. Yeah, none that I know.
I hope not.
And you can't shut it up either. I mean, if you were to find the signal in some country where the government decides, well, we better keep this under wraps. Look, the signal's up in the sky. Anybody can find it.
Yeah, you can't.
Yeah, it'd be only a matter of time.
No one owns the airwaves in space.
Well, that's right. Actually, somebody does, but
not yet.
It's Howard Hughes. Yes.
Andrew, do we sit on a question there? Did we cut you off earlier?
Yeah, it's already got asked.
Oh, got asked.
Both of them yeah.
Stole them.
All right, I got a question.
So here's a question. Well, here I got another one.
He's got one.
So far, what's the most compelling evidence that you've come across?
Well, look, this is a one-bit experiment. Until you find them, you haven't found them. So none of the data that we've collected so far indicates, or causes us to believe that, well, wait a minute, that might be an alien signal. It isn't that you have a stack of signals, all of which look like they could be aliens, and these are the better ones, and those are the less good ones, or whatever. I mean, you don't have anything. Until you find them, you haven't found them.
Right.
So then that kind of brings me to wonder what your thoughts on the Fermi paradox is.
Well, the Fermi paradox, I don't know if it can concern Fermi very much, but for those who don't know, the Fermi paradox simply says that, if the sky is actually filled with signals, or put it this way, if the universe has a lot of intelligent beings, then there ought to be, signals all over the place. You should have no trouble finding a signal because there's so many inhabitants of the Milky Way, and they want to communicate that we should find some signals. And the fact that we haven't found any signals suggests that either there are no aliens out there, or they're all being quiet. They're all mum for some reason. And, that's making a very big conclusion from a very simple observation, namely that we haven't found a signal yet. It could be that, you could have invoked the Fermi paradox back in 1491, talking to this guy, Chris Columbus, who wants to spend some government money to sail west. And you say, look, man, I mean, if there really was anything out there that was interesting to find, like a whole bunch of new continents or something, we would have found it by now. So it's just a waste of time. Well, that wasn't true. And I think the same can be said about finding signals. The fact that we haven't found any so far, I mean, you can make a laundry list of reasons why that might be true, and just don't include the possibility that nobody's out there.
Well, just the distance itself. If you go just by light speed, I mean, just the distance. Even if they were only 100 light years away, and they started progressing at the same time as humanity, and they discovered radio waves, we'd be just getting their signals now. Yeah.
But the chances that their technical development or evolution is parallel to ours in this, I think that's that's like, I don't know. I mean, walking down the street and grabbing the fourth person you find and learning that they have the same chess ranking as you do. I mean, it could be, but it's not very likely.
Highly unlikely. Or the other.
It's only one way to find out.
That's pretty easy
start
for
challenging
me.
everybody.
We tied for dead last. So,
Yeah.
or perhaps a civilization did advance and have been gone for so long that their signatures are long lost, and we'll never find them.
Well, I'm sure that there have been plenty of societies that have inhabited the Milky Way in the past that are gone for whatever reason, and we'll never discover them unless we land on their planet and find their garbage or something. I mean, yeah, that could be, but unless you think that the frequency of evolving an intelligent species is very low, in other words, that we really don't have any cosmic company here at the present time, then there should be plenty of worlds where they're producing signals, and it may not even be worlds. I mean, we tend to think of this in terms of little green guys or gray guys or whatever who walk around, never smile, never tell you their names, don't put on clothes and stuff like that. I mean, that's the way we envision the aliens. But remember, I mean, we're kind of inventing our own successors here, like Chat GBT or whatever. I mean, we're inventing the rulers of this planet 100 years from now, and that's artificial intelligence. So presumably most of the aliens that have radio, for 100 years they're on the air. But after a couple of 100 years, they've invented their successor. So it may be that the aliens we're looking for are just machines.
On to that idea, I remember reading the book that Our Final Invention, I think it was Our Final Invention, and then they had a blurb in there about with you talking about how perhaps we're not exactly looking in the correct spot. If you're looking for, as you said, AI, like we shouldn't be looking at planets. There are other areas that would probably be more suitable for an artificial super intelligence or something of that kind.
Yeah, if you think, if any of the four of you happen to actually just be AI, right?
We got one.
Well, what's yeah. Well, indeed, where would you want to live? I mean, it probably wouldn't be Peoria. I mean, you want to live in some place where there's a lot of available energy, that kind of thing. You don't care about things like water or atmospheres or any of the things that biology requires. You just require some energy and some raw material to build more machines. And, that isn't necessarily on a planet like the Earth.
And I think
somewhere more stable would be more ideal.
Or something very cold, I think is another idea, since those processes would produce, or likely to produce, a lot of heat or something like excess heat perhaps. And then they'd want to stay somewhere pretty cold. In some of the areas that we wouldn't find, you can see, habitable at all, just like places that are the coldest. I can't remember what exactly those areas were. I know there's a term for it that was mentioned, but I can't remember. It's like the small little cold spots out in space. Like, I guess it could be anywhere in between stars, really.
Well, space itself is pretty cold, actually.
Yeah, any of those.
Yeah, but you might want that if you're a machine, right? And this is just college thermodynamics, but the efficiency of any machine you have depends on the difference in temperature between the machine and the environment. So colder environments allow you to have a little bit more efficiency, if that's a consideration.
Right.
Which it may not be.
I wanted to ask you about, because in our circles we run, the WOW signal has always been a big thing. That was really like the first thing they found that they thought that this might be an ET signal. and it only happened once for like 74 seconds or something. They could never find it again. What can you explain exactly what that was?
Yeah. By the way, that was not the first time that a signal was picked up that people thought might be for real. That was actually Project Ozma. The first time anybody looked for a signal, they picked up one. So they thought it might be ET, and it turns out it was probably the U.S. military, although nobody knows. but the WOW signal was picked up at Ohio State University. Ohio State, there in lovely Columbus, had a big radio astronomy instrument, the big ears they called it, but it was this very cleverly designed, very big antenna. But by the 1970s, it was really sort of obsolete. There were much better radio telescopes around, so they didn't know what to do with it. They just sort of locked it down and let the sky sort of, rotate above it as it does because of the rotation of the Earth. And they would just, look for signals. And they did one day. Jerry Amon, I think, was the name of the astronomer. He walks into the room where all the equipment for this radio telescope was housed, and he looks at the computer printout, because in those days, of course, computers outputted their results on paper. And he found this big signal. He wrote WOW next to it because he was impressed. And that became the WOW signal. Now, it was only seen once. Well, the antenna actually had two receivers on it. So it would reobserve the same portion of the sky a second time about a minute later, as you say. So they found it once, and they didn't find it the second time. And they never found it again. And nobody has ever found it again. Many people have looked. So that's the WOW signal. Was called that because, this guy wrote WOW with a magic marker on the printout. But
Wow.
if it isn't found a second time, you can't really get too excited about it.
And so the reason he was excited because it wasn't like that narrow band that you look for, but just because it was never seen again, there's really not much to it.
Yeah, it was picked up. It also had the shape as a function of time that you would expect from a source of radio energy that's, just in the sky, and it goes into the beam and then out of the beam as the Earth rotates. And it did that exactly correctly. So it could have been, and maybe it was, but nobody's ever found it again. So you can't say, well, we found ET. You can say whatever you like, but you won't get much support for saying that it's ET because you didn't find it again.
Have you ever used that argument against a flat earther?
I am a flat earther, actually.
I knew it all along.
All right. So why are you wasting so much time studying the firmament then?
Well, that's a good question, actually. I mean, suppose we were to find something, how would your lives change? And you would know something really interesting. I mean, it doesn't mean that suddenly you're going to double your salary or anything like that, because it's unlikely you will unless you can understand what the aliens are saying and somehow commercialize that information. But it's just interesting to know in the same way that, a lot of basic research is not looking for applications of the knowledge so much as just to know things, how atoms work or stuff like that. And in astronomy, there's a lot of that. I mean, astronomy doesn't have too much in the way of application. It did a couple of hundred years ago. You could tell time accurately with astronomy, and that was important to navigation on the seas. But, these days astronomy is done mostly because it may teach you something that you didn't know before. Maybe that'll be useful, maybe it won't, but it's just interesting to know. And I think the same is true when it comes to SETI. When you're looking for, proof that somebody else inhabits the universe, I mean, what's the practical application of that? It's a little unclear, but unless you can get in touch and understand one another and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, that's a good point. I never thought of once we find it, it's like, well, okay, well, now what?
Yeah, I think a lot of people would want to, call them back, but, and I'm sure that would happen no matter what anybody thinks should happen. That will happen. But the thing is, if they're, 100 light years away, I mean, who knows how far away they are, but they're going to be at least, 4 or 5 light years away. But let's say 100 light years away. So you get on the horn and you say, hey, good to hear you guys. We're the Earthlings, and we just love to interest you in subscribing to our magazine or whatever. And it takes 100 years for that message to get to them, and then another 100 years for their response to get back to you, which might be no thanks. I mean,
You guys suck.
Really slow communication. Now, has there been a time where you've picked up something where you're like, where you've gotten really excited and it turned out to be something else? But was there ever like a specific time where you can remember where you're like, I think I may have got like, this is the one? Or do you approach everyone kind of skeptical where you're like, well, we'll wait and see?
Well, to begin with, most of this is done automatically these days, so you're not even aware of what's happening. The software only notifies you if it's, found something that seems to stand up to the kind of automated tests that you made to determine whether the signal's really coming from space. But there have been, particularly in the old days, let's say 20 years ago, when things were a little less automated, where we would pick up a signal and it, for a while, would look like it was the real deal. It passed all the original tests, but then the computers just keep applying tests. And, I remember one signal, we got modestly excited about it, but then 15 minutes later, it went away because the test proved that it was just terrestrial interference. So that was a disappointment. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned it a little bit earlier, so I was going to bring it back to that. We had Avi Loeb on here a couple of years ago, and he was talking about Oumuamua and how perhaps it was some type of either defunct or AI, alien tech. What are your thoughts on, because you said like if an AI, gives, or a civilization gives rise to its successor, and that successor might be AI, and it attaches to asteroids and it builds ships in space and it sends them all over the galaxy for whatever reason. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, they might do that. Avi Loeb, if he didn't have tenure at Harvard, so a lot of these ideas that he has probably wouldn't, be getting as much play as they do. But Avi Loeb has established his credentials long ago. I think he was chair of the astronomy department at Harvard for 5 years or something. Mm-hmm. He's a bright guy, but he also, he has a weakness for ideas that a lot of other people just sort of roll their eyeballs at. But maybe they're wrong. I'm really glad that Avi Loeb has the he has the reputation that allows him to follow up on things that other scientists would get beaten up for. Right. Yeah. So I think it's a good thing. I don't know about Oumuamua. We won't know until we find another Oumuamua. And there is some suggestion that we already have. There's something called 2I Borisov that was found by the Russians, which is also another rock that seems to not be from our solar system, but from somebody else's solar system. So if that's the case, then, okay, Oumuamua was probably just a rock. But we don't know that for sure yet. And so it's worthwhile, paying attention to these things. Maybe it's an alien ship, and if only you could get a close-up photo of Oumuamua, you would see a bunch of portholes along the side and little green faces behind them. The picture that everybody has of Oumuamua was this artist's impression, which looks like a rock. But on the other hand, we never had a photo of Oumuamua that showed it to be any more than a single pixel of light, just a little dot. So nobody knows what it looks like up close.
So you're saying what you're saying is all those pictures were fake news. It could have been a spaceship.
They were artists' impressions. The artists are probably not like to say they're fake news, but indeed they were not. They were not made by cameras that were anywhere close to Oumuamua. I think the closest Oumuamua got to us was like 200 million miles or something like that. Far away.
And I think we just read an article not too long ago. We were talking about on the show where they think they've recreated the means of its propulsion when it left the solar system, something to do with helium, hydrogen. I can't remember because it's been a while since I read the article, but they had a pretty good idea of how it accelerated now. So that, not to say they know for sure, they said they'll never know for sure because they didn't have the test. It was just a hypothesis
as to why it accelerated.
On the topic of aliens, what are your thoughts on the United States government coming out with obviously the gimbal, the Tic Tac, the Baghdad Phantom that we keep seeing on UFO Twitter and all that stuff? What are your thoughts to those kind of releases?
Yeah, well, of course, those are aliens. If they are aliens, I actually don't think they are. But if they were, those are aliens that had taken the time, the trouble, and the expense to come to Earth and, mostly seem to be interested in teasing our Navy's top guns by flying around in their airspace. I don't know if that would justify the expense for any alien society to send these guys here to Earth. But the thing about the three videos, right, the Tic Tac and so forth, is that you can come up with explanations for all three of them that don't involve alien craft at all or anything very exotic, right? The peanut, for example, the peanut, it looks like a black peanut, actually.
Yeah.
In the video there. Well, you can understand that because these videos were all made with infrared gun sight cameras on F-18 fighter jets, I think. And so, these cameras are aimed forward. Their purpose is to alert the pilot that there's something in front of them that they have to worry about, not to find aliens. But consider that there's just a commercial jet in front of the pilot, maybe 50 or 100 miles away. These things could still see that, right? If that jet in front of them is sort of flying away from them. So they're looking up the tailpipes of that jet. And, the jet has two engines, say, or even four, but with two, you just see two black dots. And if it's far enough away, then you don't have all that much resolution and the two dots kind of merge a bit. And you get a peanut-looking thing in the sky there. And all it is some other airplane, right? Well, that's true for all these videos. You can come up with very prosaic explanations for what you're seeing. And none of these require alien visitation.
Yeah, we're weather balloon guys. We usually chalk them up to weather balloons.
Weather balloons, yeah. Weather balloons have a bad rep.
They shot 3 of them down because they were so dangerous. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, as you said, it could be a easy explanation like that, or you could even go. Some of them seem to travel much faster than a human should be able to withstand, like the force of the propulsion return. So it could be some type of it could be terrestrial, like advanced drone technology, just like back in the early 90s when the Blackbird was a myth, and all of a sudden and they released it finally. Like, we have this supersonic plane, and you might have seen it taking off, and that was the UFO.
Yeah, but a lot of the argument, keep in mind, a lot of these arguments are based on the fact that, this thing was going Mach 4 or something like that. It was going much faster than anything that we have. But how do you know what speed it was going at? All you know is the angular speed across the sky. And to convert that to the real speed in miles per hour, miles per second, whatever, you need to know how far away it is.
Right.
And you don't have that information for a lot of these videos. You don't know how far away it is because you don't know what it is. So when people say, it was moving at 5,000 miles an hour, that's somebody's guess based on nothing.
Based on how far they thought it was away, kind of thing.
So can't tell me it's wrong when they say it.
It could be.
Well, have you published this too, Dan?
I was when it's like when you don't know, you're missing some kind of information like that, they can pretty much make any statement they want, and then nobody can really challenge it because it's like, well, we're missing that piece of information. And it's like, that's like,
yeah. There's a lot of argument from authority in this biz, where if somebody has some sort of technical background or is in the military and so forth, then they're believed by a lot of people simply because of their job. The other argument is an argument from ignorance when they say, well, we don't know what it was, but it's obviously moving at 10,000 miles per hour or something like that. And the people who read that don't know how you compute the speed, so that becomes an argument from ignorance for them. They believe these people are in authority; they must know.
Yeah, those are my favorite type of arguments. I read the headline, and that's as far as I go. Like,
good enough for me.
Mach 8.
At least.
He eyeballed it. He squinted with one eye. That's good enough for me. He's flown the jet.
He's his thumb.
I think that's what.
Right?
I think that's one of the. That's actually one of the things I highlighted. It's like in your book, and it was like, debate is entertaining, but exploration and experiment are definitive. So I was like that kind of. I like that kind of line. Yeah. That was good. But it's so the exploration and gathering of data is just like to know, which I think is just one of their. It seems like one of our qualities of just humans. Like, we're curious and we want to know what's out there, whether or not, like you said, it's applicable or practical or whatever. It's just like we kind of just want to know about what's going on around us and help us understand the world better. And to that, I was kind of I don't know if you're familiar with the news. Like I just saw this article today, and I guess I would ask your thoughts about it. About how NASA was like slashing their budget, or they released their budget and they cut off the Veritas. The Veritas mission was a planned mission to Venus after they had that big. The big discovery, or a lot of scientists were kind of pushing for the idea that they've detected active volcanoes or volcanism on Venus, and that this mission was going to be pretty integral into being, taking the measure of that. And there's a lot of disappointment. Or do you have any thoughts on that? Or
well, I didn't even know this was the case. I was at a NASA event actually on Friday, so 2 days ago, and nobody mentioned it then. But I think that what you're referring to was the claim, and it's about a year ago or so, that there was phosphine in the atmosphere of Venus. Mm-hmm. And that would be very interesting because phosphine can be made by bacteria, right? So it could mean there's life on Venus, which is, a bit of a surprise if true, because the daytime temperatures on the surface of Venus are like 800 degrees or something. But
balmy 800.
Huh?
Balmy 800. It's a dry heat, though. I think.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I don't know if that's Fahrenheit or centigrade, but it really at 800 it doesn't matter too much. But the point was that once you go up 20 or 30 miles into the atmosphere, which for Venus is a very thick atmosphere, it's 100 times thicker than here on Earth, then the temperatures are the same as in the room here, right? So it may be that what you were seeing were floating bacteria at the higher altitudes in Venus's atmosphere, which would be really interesting. But I think that the whole thing is very questionable because calling it phosphine was based on looking for what are called absorption lines, the spectral absorption lines in the light coming off Venus. And the way they found that involved some, if you will, mathematical manipulation of the data, which to me anyhow seemed very suspect. So I don't know that they've established that there's anything in the atmosphere that's biological at all. But, sending more hardware to Venus seems like a good idea to me. The problem is, of course, any hardware you send to Venus usually melts shortly after getting there. So that's a problem.
Yeah. I
think
think
I've seen a very thin window to send stuff back.
Yeah, I've seen some interesting concepts about what possibly, you could have my favorite was basically, like you said, they have the, very thick atmosphere. You could basically have like an airship and, a balloon kind of platform, just kind of sit and float, conceptually. Yeah, sit on top of there. Style. Yeah, you would drop off. It'd be like a research station, but set on top of the clouds. Always kind of like that idea. I thought that was pretty neat. But
and if you have a failed engine, it's catastrophic for everyone aboard.
So Dan was saying something about NASA's funding getting cut. Where does SETI get its funding from?
Well, SETI these days does not get money from NASA. Really, it doesn't. At least not for our SETI experiments. But that was killed, by the way, by a congressman back in 1993. He killed the NASA SETI program.
What?
Yeah. He did. Well, if you live in the state of Nevada, don't reelect this guy. But in any case, SETI now gets its money for doing SETI from, private donations. It's just private money. Yeah.
So I'd imagine, it must be hard then for funding, I'd imagine.
Well, it is difficult. Now, as it turns out, a fellow here by the name of Yuri Milner, he's actually Russian, but he lives, part-time in Moscow and part-time here in the Silicon Valley where I am. Anyhow, he was very interested in SETI, and he's funded the Breakthrough Listen program, which is a SETI program mostly run out of the University of California at Berkeley. But he funds them, and he funds them with enough money that they can actually do very good experiments.
Awesome. Legend.
So I'm just curious, where can members of the public or people listening, if they wanted to donate to SETI, where do they go?
Well, it's up to them, but they should just look on the web for SETI programs, obviously at the SETI Institute where I am. Just go to the SETI Institute's website. I think it's just SETI.org. But the Berkeley guys are, you could look them at the University of California at Berkeley. Their projects are, everybody has a website, so it's not very hard to find. And usually these organizations don't protest too loudly if you want to give them some money.
I'd imagine.
I don't think anyone protests too
I don't want it.
ever. Yeah.
So I know there's SETI, and I was actually surprised to learn, I guess it was a couple months ago, I think we were talking about, alien invasions, or, a prospect of that happening, but we were talking about, there's the other associate, they're not associated directly with SETI, but there's the other one, and we kind of talked about sending signals. There's the other organization. I can't, something METI, that's it. That's the one.
Messaging extraterrestrial intelligence. Yes.
Right. So, like, for them, like, how well do you know them? Like, what is their? What's
well,
their
last I knew, METI had one employee, who coincidentally also happened to be the head of METI.
Whoa.
That's crazy. So this is the big value brand of SETI, basically.
Well, but that's transmitting. So that's a different project. But it's the name of the guy is Douglas Vakoch. He lives here in the San Francisco Bay Area. He had an office up in the city, up in San Francisco, actually. I don't know if he's kept the office or not, since there's only one person involved. He may just work from home now. I don't know. But in any case, what he tries to do is get time on radio telescopes that have a transmitter, telescopes that can not only, listen, but can also broadcast and then send messages into space in the direction of nearby stars that are like the sun in general. And he's done that at least once. I think it was in 2017. But in any case, so he constructs some messages. I think for Doug, the most interesting part of METI is constructing the message. What are you going to say to the aliens?
Yeah. What do you send?
yeah. Well, he sends pictures. He just, the history here is, there have been a lot of messages to aliens that have been sent mostly on spacecraft, right? You all remember the Pioneer plaque with the nudie cutie couple and
Big Dad and golden discs and whatever.
Yeah, right. And there was also the Voyager records had messages as well, and music. Let's send them some Beethoven, but let's send also some Beatles or whatever. So, there's been a lot of people have been interested in this message construction. But on the other hand, those messages to this globular cluster that were sent, I don't know, decades ago now, they're still going to take thousands of years to get there. And then there's another couple of thousand years for their response, if there is a response from the aliens, get to us. So I think that the most interesting efforts in this field are to message to close by stars. And some of that is being done by METI. But on the other hand, you've got to have patience, because it might take a couple of dozen years before you can even expect to get a reply. Whereas with SETI, when you're just looking for a message, just looking for a signal, you might find that in the next hour, right? You don't have to wait for anything.
That's a good point.
Yeah, it could be eavesdropping between two planets already messaging each other, just intercepting that signal.
It's the middleman.
So if you were, I'm just saying, if you were on the other side, if you're on the METI, like what would you put in your message? Like what do you think would be like the most, I guess, like how would you encapsulate human culture like into a message, like something?
Yeah. Well, as I say, what's been done is simply to sort of mimic what was done with the Voyager, the Pioneer plaques and the Voyager records, and, just show them pictures of us or how many of us there are and stuff like that. But personally, what I would send is I would just send the internet. I would just code up the internet and send it all, because anything they want to know, you can probably find on the internet. And there'd be a lot of redundant material, and there'd probably be some pornography. But I can't imagine that the aliens would care much about the pornography. So I would just send as much material as you could.
They'd be like, why is this 90% pornography? Like, surely there's more interesting stuff.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't even worry about that. What's pornography to us is, not pornography to my dog. Let alone the aliens. I don't think.
Wouldn't it just be like the National Geographic Channel to them anyways?
Yeah,
they just want to study it. What's going on here?
No, that's how they do it.
So Seth, what's your, I wanted to ask, I had this written down. Do you have a favorite like alien in movie or an alien movie?
Well, my favorite sci-fi films tend to be the ones that I saw when I was a kid, because, they made a much bigger impression on me. And I remember seeing War of the Worlds, the 1954 one, whatever was the year. I don't remember. And I was a kid, but my God, that really scared me. I couldn't sleep all night. I couldn't sleep for a week. So I guess those are my favorite. But I mean, I go to all of them, or as many of them as I can, in these sci-fi films, because I always like to see what other people think might be, the experience of meeting the aliens or going to an alien planet. I mean, even the Alien series of movies, the first one in particular, right? Where they find this guy. I mean, that was really, really interesting. And it was a different kind of take on the aliens too, which I thought was kind of nice. So, but I don't know that I have a favorite. I like them all.
I thought you were going to say Contact.
No, I was a consultant for Contact, actually. So I had something to do with, what they put in there, but, it was good, but I was kind of disappointed that the aliens looked like Ellie Arroway's dad. I mean, I thought that was a cop out. I want to see real aliens.
I guess I think that's everybody's like, I say, oh man, my form would be too disturbing to you before you would not be able to comprehend my entire being and essence. And it would
exactly.
blow
Well, we don't make statements like that before wandering around the zoo.
That's true.
You animals are in for a big
horror show.
I just said never-ending horror show of human filth coming through.
I'm sure the fish look at us and from the aquarium just like, just utter disgust.
Scream.
I always thought that too. I was like, you know what? I think I can. I'm an adult. I can handle it. Show me.
Now, Seth, just before
I'll be the judge of what I can handle.
Well, in some of the sci-fi films that were made in the 50s and 60s, occasionally the aliens would look like, there was one. What was it? It Came from Outer Space, I think was the name of the film. And the aliens look like us. But at some point, one of the humans says, it's really remarkable. You guys look just like us, which, of course, saves on, the cost of making the film. But and he said, but
saves on latex.
Is that what you really look like? And the alien said, no. And it's just a mask we put on that, and so the humans said, well, can we see what you really look like? And they remove the mask, and it looks like, something made out of, 10 old vacuum cleaners. I mean, with hoses and stuff like that. It was really horrifying. It was really horrifying. That was worthwhile. And the rest of the film wasn't very good, but that part was really good.
So you said you consulted on Contact. Have you consulted on any other of these sci-fi movies?
A couple. Yeah, they call up, and what they really want to know is something that solves a particular problem that they're having. Okay, so we've got these astronauts in this spacecraft, and then it goes behind the moon, and for 20 minutes we can't communicate with them because they're blocked by the moon, and so consequently something attacks them when we can't see, and that sort of thing. What could happen to them? That kind of thing. Or usually it's just technical detail. They want to know, well, what would it be like if, that kind of thing.
No, it's
well,
cool.
I feel like SETI is the perfect example of the beginning of every alien movie, where you have all those scientists sitting in a room, and then they pick up some sort of signal on some type of radar, and they freak out and grab a phone and call somebody.
Well, that does happen a lot. Usually they just see something on an oscilloscope. I don't think we even own an oscilloscope anymore, but an oscilloscope, suddenly you see this spiky thing, and then of course you have the audio that tells you that this is an alien thing because it's some sound you've never heard before. Even in the movie Contact, which was fairly accurate, you hear this thing that sounds like a pile driver hitting a pod of whales, right? and that was much better than the visuals. Just this terrible sound.
Awesome. Now, Seth, just before we let you go, you're going to be speaking at Contact in the Desert.
So, I am, it seems. Yes, I've never gone to one of those. So
if people are looking to check Seth out live, that's where he's going to be. Was that June 2nd to 4th? But if people want to find you, if they're not going to make Contact in the Desert, do you have a YouTube channel, or where would people go to find more of your interviews or your work?
Well, I don't really endorse that idea for anybody. I mean, why would they want that? But No, I mean, obviously they can go to the SETI Institute's website and find me. We also have a weekly science radio show, Big Picture Science. You can get that online.
That's good.
And
that's more that shows more than just about SETI. It's about science and astronomy in general.
Well, not even just astronomy; it's science.
Just any cool
general.
science, forefront of science.
Smart people talk about smart things. That's good.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, we tend to interview a couple of people in every show about something. I mean, maybe it's artificial intelligence, or maybe it's something else. But whatever.
Awesome. Seth.
And I just had one quick question before you go, because I bought an artifact off Facebook Marketplace. I just wanted, it says do not open, so I just wanted to know your thoughts. I was told this is 100% a recovered alien being.
Yeah, I got one of those in our office, but it looks a little different. Yeah, you notice that the aliens are just the right size to fit into the biggest jar you can buy inexpensively.
Yeah. Well, it says
Pickle
do
jar.
not open on top of mine. So I just wasn't sure if you have one too. Can we just agree that this is proof right here?
I guess so. You can buy a lot of those things in Roswell, by the way, if you go there. Well, the problem with the one we had was that the water eventually corroded the alien. The alien turned into rubbery crud at the bottom of the jar.
It does.
Alien soup.
I did get a note that said, give it a shake every once in a while. So maybe that has something to do with getting some of that gunk off there.
Yeah.
But I just thought I'd share that I may have proof of alien life right here. So.
Well, just keep it on your desk. The disturbing thing is if in the morning you come in and you find that the jar is still there, but the alien is gone.
Oh,
I don't worry about that.
You'll be the first person I call.
Seth. Awesome. Hey, thanks very much. We appreciate the time. I know you're a busy man, so that's a 1-hour interview. We really appreciate it. And we hope to be the first show you contact when you find the first guaranteed alien signal.
Well, I'll try and keep that in mind. I promised some other show I would do that too, so I don't know if I'll remember, but okay.
Just CC us on the email. And
We'll
piggyback. No worries.
All right, and Seth, just stick around for a second. We'll tell you how to finish the upload of your audio, and for the rest of you, as we always say at the end of these things, keep those eyes on the skies.